Welcome friends to a new video workshop that explains the purpose of gray underpainting known as Grisaille or the dead layer. This video is the first part of a new upcoming layering oil painting video workshop. Why paint everything in gray color when it's painted over with a color layer anyway? What is the gray underpainting for and what is its purpose? You will find all the answers to these questions in this video, so enjoy the show. I always start painting by oiling out the acrylic imprimatur. The surface I'm painting on is too absorbent due to acrylic base I used for the imprimatur, so I need to feed the surface with a thin layer of linseed oil to reduce absorbency. Then I wipe off the excess oil with a makeup sponge to leave a thin layer of oil on the surface, which the colors adhere to better and make blending much easier. Although this is a shortened process without previous underpaintings, I decided to create a quick raw umber underpainting in the shadows to get a warmer hue under the gray layer of paint. I started painting with lightest values, which are on the lit side of the rows. For the direct technique of underpainting, a darker imprimatur is used compared to the creation of underpainting with umber. Its tone of value should be somewhere in the middle of the value scale. A darker value removes the white color of the canvas and thus excessive contrast, which complicates the correct judging of values. On a darker imprimatur, it's better to work with lighter hues, which during the application of gray will expand the value scale back to its maximum potential. The dark imprimatur is a very simplified substitute for umber underpainting. While you watch me paint, let's talk a little more about gray underpainting. Each oil painting is a three-dimensional object composed of several different materials. These materials include the surface on which the painting is created, preparatory layers of paint, underpaintings, and color layers, including final varnishes. The quality and structure of the individual color layers determine not only the optical properties of the work of art, but also the durability of the entire painting from a technical point of view. All different kinds of underpainting, including Grisaille, have one thing in common. They are all made up of one hue. Whether it is an imprimatur, umber underpainting, or the dead layer, they are always created with one specific hue and are therefore monochromatic from the point of view of color harmony. So, what's the point of all those underlayers if we end up repainting them anyway? Single color underpaintings are used to lay out values or determine the tonality of individual elements and to distribute lights and shadows in the future composition using one specific hue. In this way, color, saturation, and temperature are excluded from the painting process in the beginning stage. What was determined in the underpaintings is mechanically repeated in other layers as well. In contrast to the direct painting technique, tasks of color are solved in the next part after the underpaintings have dried. Even though sometimes the layering process seems complex and lengthy, its task is to simplify the entire procedure and divide it into individual steps. So, you already know that the basis of every underpainting is value. If you first create an umber underpainting before applying the dead layer, you have solved all the tonal changes and distribution of values of your composition. When looking at an umber underlayer, think of the underpainting as a black and white painting. You can create a black and white photo for simplicity if you want. Each place of the painting has a certain value according to the value scale used. If you want to speed up the entire layering painting process, you have the option of starting the gray underpainting directly on the imprimatur, as I did in this case. However, you must at the same time solve any tonal changes during the application of the paint, which would otherwise have been worked out in the previous underpainting. While the previous method of underpainting with the umber and gray was mainly used by Flemish masters, the more direct technique of painting the dead layer directly on the imprimatur appeared in the Baroque period. During painting, I almost completely covered the entire previous layer of imprimatur. In practice, since I apply a thin layer of gray in the shadows, the lower layer always shows through a little bit, which results in slightly warming up in the shadow areas. Monochromatic underpainting does acquire a variation of temperatures from cooler hues in the light to warmer areas in the shadows. A complete dead layer is suitable if your goal is a detailed and accurate academic painting that is based on a perfect distribution of values. Underpaintings are more or less visible even through the upper layers of color. They complement the color of the finished painting by providing a warm or cool undertone to the top colors that are applied over the underpainting. By layering, you can create such color effects that cannot be achieved with a direct painting technique. In general, underpainting is most visible in the shadow parts of the model or halftone areas, depending on what type of underpainting it is. Sometimes such an underpainting is painted over to such an extent that it is no longer visible in the finished painting. Sometimes, on the contrary, it does not have to be covered at all and even replace the local color of the subject. However, the gray underpainting should be most visible in the areas of the halftone. According to the rules of classical oil painting, the areas in the halftone are always cooler and less saturated than local and shadow colors. The gray underpainting therefore has the task of optically reducing the saturation and temperature in places where the light passes into the shadow. This can be achieved in such a way that during painting and application of color layers, the gray underpainting remains exposed to a certain extent or is at most painted over with a transparent layer of paint. If it is visible through the color layer, it reduces its saturation and cools its temperature following the mentioned rule. Different oil paints have different covering strengths depending on the pigment and binder used. Some colors are suitable for thin glaze layers, others on the contrary are more suitable for application in thicker pasty layers. However, the problem arises if you need to create a thick layer of paint on the illuminated part of the subject with a paint that has a weak covering ability. This is where another function of gray underpainting comes into play, and that is texture creation. Grisaille as an underlaying preparatory layer adds body to the colors. In the past, pasty deposits of grey underpainting were mainly made of lead white, the most suitable color for underpainting. A heavy layer of color emerging from the canvas also complements the composition in terms of perspective. Although Grisaille is made up of grey color, specific color and temperature tendencies can be traced even among the low chromatic hues of grey, depending on the purpose for which the grey underpainting is used. Grey underpainting can have a cool bluish hue, a warm hue approaching an umber color, or a neutral shade with no apparent color tendency. The local color of the painted subject decides which shade is best to use for painting. For example, Grisaille with a cool hue is used for portrait painting. For a male portrait, grey with a bluish cool hue is best suited. For a painting of woman, it is more appropriate to use a grey underpainting with a shade of green. As the underpainting is more or less visible in the halftone areas of the finished painting, it complements the yellow-red tones of the skin with its cool hue. Mixing of grey colors for Grisaille is basically a simple process. You need minimum 5 or 6 shades to cover the whole value scale to work on the painting. There are many ways to mix the required color. Personally, I most often use the method used by old masters as well. Although this method is a little more complicated and requires some experience with mixing colors. If you want to know more about how to mix grays the old masters way, check out my Patreon or join my YouTube channel. Here you will find a video that demonstrates how to mix classic Grisaille. But don't worry guys, I have a good news for you. Grey can also be mixed in a more straightforward way, which I also use in this case of painting this rose. For mixing, you will need white and some dark earth hue. The most suitable dark colors certainly include raw umber. This color has a warm and sufficiently dark hue, and together with white, it forms natural hues suitable, for example, for still life painting. Raw umber will serve excellently as a universal color for underpainting. However, if you need a cooler underpainting, for example for the mentioned portrait, you cannot avoid adding other colors to change the hue in the desired direction. As for the white, if necessary, you can replace the lead white with titanium white as I did. Although it does not achieve such a high quality properties, it will work as a substitute. Turpentine is the most suitable as a primary diluent for thinning underpaintings. During the underpainting's thinning, it's not necessary to use any oil at all. Turpentine is a traditional material used for centuries and has stood the test of time. If the strong smell of turpentine bothers you, you can use a modern alternative of odorless mineral spirit. The paint must be diluted according to the fat over lean rule. If I thinned the previous underpainting only with turpentine, the subsequent grey layer of paint must contain less turpentine than the previous one. The portion of turpentine decreases as the number of underpainting increases. Less thin paint contains more oil and is therefore fatter. At the same time, the gray underpainting is applied thicker than the previous underpaintings. This applies especially to the illuminated areas of the painted subject. A thicker layer of color is applied to the illuminated part of the subject. Conversely, a weak translucent layer of Grisaille is applied to the shadow areas. And that's all for today, friends. If you want to see full tutorial of this video, make sure you check out my full tutorial. Is the top link in the description below the video. If you like this video, make sure you click that like and the subscription button for me and leave me a comment down below as well. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'll see you again in the next part of this layering painting tutorial. Bye bye.